Well, if you've got a Bible, please have it open at the passage we read from John chapter 21 and verses 15 to 24. John chapter 21, verses 15 to 24. Now, people say all sorts of things, don't they? But one of the things people talk about is their faith in something. So people say, I've lost faith in the government. Or they say they've lost faith in social media companies like Facebook. They've lost faith in their employer. Or they've lost faith in their church. And various other things. See, we've all been let down, haven't we? We trusted people. We trusted institutions, businesses, charities. Yet that trust was misplaced. Those people or organisations didn't deliver. The faith we put in them proved to be worthless. Perhaps you feel like that with Jesus. Now, you wouldn't say that, but actually, what has been the point in your life of trusting Jesus? He didn't save my loved one from death. He watched me work hard while less deserving individuals were promoted above me. He took away my friends when they left our church. He allowed me to be terminally ill. He saw those people abuse me, and he didn't step in. It's hard to grow in faith, isn't it? As Christians, we talk about answered prayer encouraging us, which it does, or how fellow believers support us, which they do, hopefully. But deep down in many of us, there are nagging questions. Is it really worth it? Now, I'm not coming to you this morning with all the answers. I'm someone who struggles greatly in this particular area. And I've been thinking this week, how can I preach a sermon on growing in faith? Well, thankfully, you're not to trust me. At least not in terms of the Bible, because I will let you down. I'll make mistakes. You don't put your faith in my life. All I can do is join you as we look together at the Word of God. And this morning we're looking at John 21, and we are eavesdropping in on Jesus' conversation with Peter. We're seeing and hearing the denied speaking with the denier. The sinless one speaks with a sinner that he died for. And it's very personal. It's about love. It's about action. It's about destiny. But it's also about faith. It's about how faith begins, how faith is lived out, and how faith transforms our view of others. So first of all, do you want to grow in faith? Then love Jesus. Do you want to grow in faith? Then love Jesus. I remember some years ago, one of my former pastors talking to me about John 21, about this beautiful scene in the whole chapter, Jesus feeding his disciples with breakfast on the beach. And this former pastor was enthused with the grace and the love of Jesus, still serving his failed followers. Now, in this conversation, I responded, yes, that's right. But, in my heart, I was thinking, but what about the text, the Greek? What about the verbs used? What about the commands of Jesus? I'd forgotten that the most basic part of following Jesus. It begins with love. It begins with love because he first loved us. And on that beach, we see Jesus' love. Jesus said that the first and the greatest command was to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. Now, many of us want more faith. We want to do this or that, or perhaps we're sad about our lack of faith. How could I have responded differently in that particular situation? But faith, of course, isn't a switch that you turn off and turn on. It's not a natural talent. It's not dependent on how good a Christian you are. Do you want to grow in faith? Well, first and foremost, you must love Jesus. I mean, look at how Jesus deals with Peter in these verses we're studying. He doesn't ask his failed disciple to have faith. He doesn't say, do better. He asks him, do you love me more than these? Is Peter's love for Jesus greater than his love for his friends, his business partners, even his brother, Andrew? Do you love Jesus? Now, we often talk about devoted husbands and wives, don't we? And by that we mean that a spouse who loves their other half, forsakes others for them, makes sacrifices for them, a devoted husband, a devoted wife. Well, before the cross, Peter was devoted to himself and his own survival. But he failed. He knows that his faith that he had in himself was misplaced. He let himself down. He let his friends down. And he let Jesus down. Now, after Jesus' resurrection, Peter can only rely on Jesus. No longer can he make bold predictions about what he's going to do for Jesus. He's got to rely on Jesus. See, Jesus doesn't want your bold predictions. He doesn't want your self-protection. He doesn't want your duty, and he doesn't want your reliability. He wants you to be devoted to him. He wants you to love him, because everything else flows from love. So this morning, do you want to grow in faith? Well, love Jesus. See, instinctively, we all know that the people we love ultimately are the people we trust. You know, sometimes they let us down, but ultimately we love them. We trust them with the intimate details of our lives. We open up to them and not others. See, growing in faith in the Lord must begin with love, because if we don't love him, we're not going to trust him, are we? We're not going to obey him. We're not going to accept his loving rule over our lives. Do you want to grow in faith? First of all, love Jesus. Secondly, do you want to grow in faith? Then do what Jesus says. Do what Jesus says. We don't follow the current lockdown rules because we love the government. We do it because we have to. It's obedience based on duty, not love. Now in John 14 verse 15, we have Jesus' words recorded. If you love me, you will keep my commands. And Jesus says to Peter in this passage we've got, do you love me? And when Peter responds, yes, Jesus gives him commands. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. He doesn't say to Peter, love me more. He doesn't say to Peter, you love me, that's great, let's just ride off into the sunset. No. Love, because love leads to obedience. We won't grow in faith unless we're willing to do what Jesus says. Because ultimately that's the point, isn't it? We trust that he knows best. We trust that he knows the future. We trust that he is trustworthy. You know, we all know this deep down, don't we? Faith can't mature if we're disobedient. You know, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells us to let our yes be yes and our no be no. We're not to wriggle out of what we have committed to or what we have said no to. Be straight with people and trust the outcome to Jesus. You know, can you imagine how different our society would be if we all obeyed Jesus? If everyone was trustworthy? But nobody is completely trustworthy. It's not like that, is it? We don't all obey Jesus. You see, obedience is ultimately an act of faith. It is trusting that the person giving us the direction is trustworthy. You're not going to obey the person you don't trust. Or at the very least, you only obey as long as you have to. And that's why public confidence in lockdown arrangements relies heavily on trusting those in power. If you don't trust what they are saying, you're not going to follow it. And that's one of the big problems in America. Our obedience to Jesus is an act of faith. It is acknowledging that Jesus knows the right more than we do. It is submitting to Jesus' rule over our lives. It is living with him as king, not us. The pastor, Paul Tripp, says this: your life will never be what it was meant to be if you live like you own you. Your life will never be what it was meant to be if you live like you own you. You know, all human beings desire to live like they own themselves. We want to rule. Now, some of you may say, well, I've given my life to Jesus. He owns my life. Well, that's great. But think about this. Is he owning your life? Is that the way it is when you're spreading gossip? When you're lusting after someone? When you're carrying bitterness? You see, the truth is, so often we might say that we've given our lives to Jesus, but we still want to own ourselves. Growing in faith means doing what Jesus says. It means trusting his rule above yours. Thirdly, do you want to grow in faith? Then live the life that you have been given. Live the life that you have been given. Imagine being told that you will die for Jesus. That's what Peter hears in verse 18 of John 21. The words Jesus uses are the words typically used about crucifixion. You know, someone will lead you by the arms and someone else will dress you and they'll take you where you don't want to go. Jesus is saying to Peter, you're going to be crucified. You're going to be crucified because you love me, because you trust me, because you obey me. And this is the life that Peter has been given. He must feed and care for Jesus' people. He must be willing to be humiliated for Jesus. He must be willing to die for Jesus. And then Peter does what many of us would do. He sees John and he says, well, what about him? Yeah, what's going through Peter's head? You're telling me what will happen at the end of my life? Who else will go through this? I won't be alone, surely. I want to know everything. What will others go through? We see a lot of this in our world, don't we? Particularly with social media. But it's always been in us. You know, what's happening with the neighbours? You know, the lives of the TV sitcom family, the gossip columns. There's this unhealthy interest that we have in the lives of others as we compare, contrast, obsess. You know, why is that happening to them and not me? Or why is it happening to me and not them? But it's no business of Peter's what Jesus has planned for John, because that is John's life. It's not Peter's life. I wonder how many of us fall down here. We look at someone else's life. They have more money. They have better health. Perhaps they've achieved more. Their kids are better behaved. Their life just seems so much easier. God has blessed them more. Their church is more mature and more effective. Their pastor is better than ours. You know, when we get caught up in this kind of thinking, we've got to ask the question, where is our faith? You know, when we start saying, God loves them more than me, or God doesn't want me to enjoy this or that, what are we saying? We're saying we don't trust him, aren't we? It's like in the words of the rock band Living Colour. In another life, all your jokes are funny. In another life, your heart is free from fear. In another life, you make a lot of money. In this other life, everything is clear. And that might be the life that we want, but it isn't the life that we have been given. The life that you and I are living right now is the life that you and I have been given. And yes, it has been shaped by others. And yes, it has been affected by our sin and the sin of others. And yes, we have made good decisions and bad decisions. And yes, things could have been different, but they weren't different. And God knew all that. And God brought them into your life and allowed them into your life so that you would grow in faith. You know, there's a famous poem, isn't there, about being the captain of your ship. I am the captain of my ship. But you and I aren't the captain of our ships. The captains. We're not the masters of our destiny. God is the master of our destiny. And this life is the life that he has given you and me. And in this life that you and I have been given, we are to love him and obey him and live our lives, not somebody else's. Do you want to grow in faith? Well, live the life that Jesus has given to you. Finally, do you want to grow in faith? Then trust that Jesus knows what is best for you. Trust that Jesus knows what is best for you. Do you get angry when things don't go to plan? I do. Whether it's a technology issue, and I've had lots of those in recent months, or the kids playing up, or an unwanted phone call, or illness and injury, what I perceive as unfair criticism. It makes me angry. And part of that, if I'm honest, is self-righteousness. Part of that is my lack of faith in Jesus, because I don't really trust that he knows what is best for me. I wonder if you're a bit like me sometimes. I think Peter was. You know, how can Peter being crucified be what is best for him? It's upside down, isn't it? It's topsy-turvy. Crucifixion is what is bad, surely. Suffering is bad. Being humiliated is bad. And that's why he wants to know if John will have the same fate. It'll make him feel a bit better and not singled out. But faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. That's what Hebrews 11 verse 1 tells us. And Peter is beginning to understand this. You know, for example, we see his attitude to trials and suffering in his first letter, chapter 1, verses 6 to 7. What do? They grow our faith in Jesus. They refine it. The trials and the suffering change us. They grow our love for Jesus. And as he reflects later in that letter, he's hoping for Jesus to return. He's certain of heaven. He's certain of a new creation. And if he must endure suffering, and if his readers must endure suffering, if that's what Jesus has ordained to grow their faith and his faith, then so be it. We know that kids don't think that adults know what is best. It's part of growing up, isn't it? That's why you hear adults saying, "Get down from there. What do you think you're wearing? Don't behave like that," etc., etc. And just to be honest, adults don't like anybody else who thinks they know best. Don't interfere. Don't you tell me how to parent. This is my life. This is our family. We like to be in charge, don't we? You know, last week, Graham reminded us that we want to be in charge. You know, I want to be king. We want to be kings of our lives. But the reality is I fail. I sin. I think that I know what is best for me. But I don't know what is best for me. A lot of my life shows I don't know what is best for me. My waistline shows that I don't know what is best for me. But in an even greater level, I need a saviour who does know what is best for me. I need a better king. And Jesus is that better king. Jesus is the perfect king. Jesus is the one who does know what is best for me. Jesus is the one who does know what is best for you. But the question is, do you and I trust that? Does he really know what is best for me? You know, we have so much to learn, as do Peter and the other disciples. They're still fixated with knowing everything as they spread rumours about John staying alive until Jesus returns. But of course the problem there is they're not living by faith, are they? You know, have you lost faith in Jesus? Just in this area, you know, you don't think that Jesus knows what is best for you. You've struggled on a number of things in your life. And that's a big question, but here's an even bigger question. And it's back to the starting point. Do you love Jesus? In your trials, in your griefs, in your doubts? Do you love him? You know, even though you have not seen him, even though you will not see him until he returns, do you love him? Now, growing in faith begins with loving Jesus. It continues with obeying Jesus. It focuses on living the life that you have been given. It's refined by trusting that Jesus knows what is best for you. Jesus wants us, you and me, to grow in faith. And it's about time that we did. We're going to sing our last song together. So let's raise our voices and sing.